What's up, everyone? Episode 7 of the Quarantine Q&A, and today we're going to talk about contradiction and what I would do if I could change the permanent forum on Indigenous issues, and the hardest decision that I had to make ever at the UN. So let's go.
Does taking the indigenous route mean that you don't want to be independent?
All right, to answer this question, it requires a little bit of unpacking, a little bit of explanation or context, actually, to answer this question. Otherwise, I could give the answer right away, but this question warrants a little bit more context. So basically, the people of Maluku, we were colonized by the Portuguese, the Dutch. The Dutch actually for a very long time, for like over 300 years. They left our islands in 1950, or like chose to decolonize our islands. It was under the auspices of the UN, and so they left. Sukarno, so Indonesian politician, wanted to declare a republic, like a totalitarian state, and we deemed that this would not be beneficial to the peoples of Maluku, so we declared ourselves independent, so that we could, because that was an option in the agreements. So we went for that option and declared ourselves independent on April 25th, 1950. So that is actually, like, a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated the 70th anniversary of that proclamation. We did that because Sukarno was on the verge of invading our islands, because he wanted to create that totalitarian, like, unified state of Indonesia. We chose otherwise, and we paid the price for it. Had like an total open war of Indonesian forces against our peoples, and we had a lot of soldiers actually that used to work for the Dutch government. Because of that colonization issue, but the Dutch, instead of like letting those soldiers, which includes my grandparents, go back to the islands to help out, they had made Indonesia made the Dutch ship all these soldiers to Holland, and now you have a community of like almost 60,000 Maluku natives living in Holland at due to forced relocation. But it's all because of that proclamation of independence. So April 25th, 1950, and up until today, at least most of people from Maluku that are still supportive of that idea, of that ideal, or of the independence. So the question, so I think that was the premise of that question, because people think that you want to go for a total independence, which contradicts with what Indigenous peoples want. And I think the problem there is with the concept of Indigenous peoples. What those, at least the person that asked the question, thank you for the question though, your concept, your framework, or your parameters of Indigenous peoples is inaccurate. And if you look at a Wikipedia a definition of Indigenous peoples, or you do a Google search and you click on the top thread, and it basically says Indigenous peoples are a minority within a majority. All they want is equal rights. And that's the misconception about that, because Indigenous peoples are not always a minority. There are many Indigenous peoples that are the majority within the state. If you look at the Pacific, in Vanuatu, the majority is indigenous. If you go to Tuvalu, it's probably around 100% of them, 99% maybe, is indigenous to Tuvalu. So being indigenous doesn't mean that you're necessarily a minority within a majority. It doesn't always also mean that by definition that you the only thing that you want, or the only thing that is achievable according to you, or according to other people or states, for example, is that Indigenous peoples only want equal rights. Now, like some Indigenous peoples want to go for independence. Some want to reclaim their sovereignty. Like they have, you have a lot of Indigenous peoples from Turtle Island, for example. They had their treaties with the crown, treaties with other Indigenous peoples as well. So they were sovereign before. Hawaii was sovereign. Was a kingdom. Look. So a lot of Indigenous peoples, they want to go back to not go back, but they want to claim that sovereignty, because it's their right to be sovereign as an independent nation, or as a nation. So that is that misconception out there, that like majority minority thing, equal rights, and that the only thing that you want is to have like equal participation, or have your rights to exist as a community within the larger political context that you live in. And that is inaccurate, because a lot of Indigenous people that I've talked to, that I know, they have a different perspective. They want to see it differently. They want to go back to, or at least claim their sovereignty, like become a nation again. Oh, sorry, they're already a nation, but like are recognized as such, like with the sovereignty, with the rights that come with it. So that's something that I wanted to address as well, like the misconception. If, at least from my point of view, and that is because, and my point of view has been shaped by conversation with the International Indigenous Peoples movement, as well as having worked with my mom's organization for like decades, and having talked to like various people on the islands, that it is very important to first establish yourself as a nation before you go for international recognition of that nation. The best way, at least as from an Indigenous point of view, like to establish yourself as a nation, is to establish yourself as a peoples. Have assert recognition of you as a peoples. So that's what we're doing right now. At least that's why I'm moving within the Indigenous route, if you call that. Like trying to establish ourselves as a peoples, like in that international community of Indigenous peoples, and help other Indigenous peoples along the way. Like this movement is meant to help one another. So it's better to move forward as a collective than as an individual. At least that's how I think about things. So going through the Indigenous route is actually, in my view, like the best way to the best process, the best way to start a process for eventually international recognition, because you go through that establishing yourself as peoples. You go into nation building built upon the values as an Indigenous peoples, and the heritage and everything that comes along with it, like structure, infrastructure, governing systems, food sovereignty, etc., etc. You go through that particular element process of nation building. So in that sense, then you have a very good basis to continue that process of international recognition of yourself, of your peoples as a nation state, because that is the ultimate goal, at least for a Maluku perspective, from a Maluku point of view. So I hope that explains why it is very important, at least why I am so adamant about going through the Indigenous way route, if you want to call it, towards independence or regaining sovereignty. It is. And I've been talking to a lot of Indigenous peoples around the Pacific and around the world as well, that have a similar idea in terms of like end goal, and they all agree that that is the best way to start nation building, and nation building as a basis towards international recognition of yourself as an indigenous nation. Why am I only focused on international recognition and not nation building? Well, I do provide a lot of input on like the nation building efforts of indigenous peoples on the islands, on Maluku Islands, and other indigenous communities of indigenous peoples around the world. But I know that my niche, my what I'm good at is the international recognition part. So I go all in on that and making sure that that doesn't prohibit the nation building efforts. I'm making sure that that is ready once the nation building efforts are done. Once we have in a satisfactory position to move from nation building to international recognition. So I think that is a little bit my mindset when it comes to the indigenous route, or whatever you want to call it, or why I do what I do right now. And I hope that people that were skeptic about, I hope that this answers the questions that of people that were very skeptic about what I do, because eventually RMS, or the Republic of the South Moluccas, is the goal, is the end goal, the end, period. So everything that I do is geared towards that. It can take a very long time, it can take a very short time, it doesn't matter. Like, it all matters that it happens the way it should happen, based on a very good fundamental basis. You know, like, we proclaimed ourselves independent on April 25th, 1950. That doesn't mean that that is the very good basis. You know, the very good basis is nation building. Like, you can use the proclamation as a starting point, but the basis should be nation building. So that is in general, like the my thoughts actually behind this. So I hope that answers your question. And yeah, I think it warrants also like a little bit, it triggers my mind, or it triggers me to do more content, to create more content around this, because it's very, very important that not just myself, organizations, some indigenous peoples organizations worldwide, or Maluku, or movements like understand it, but like the general public understands it. So I'm thinking about doing more content about that.
You share a lot. Aren't you afraid that you contradict yourself?
I'm not afraid to contradict myself, because I see my own concept of what I know, my truth, my knowledge, as a very fluid concept. As it, like, what I know right now, I'm more than willing to share, but I'm also very conscious that it is it is available to flexibility, as in, like, you can get new information every day. I'm not married to the concepts that I have. I'm married to the goals that I have, though. I'm married to the infinite goal, what I talked about before, like Q&A. Was it 5 or 4? That is something that is very important to me. But in terms of contradicting myself, I'm not afraid. I do get, though, why you asked this question about me being afraid of contradiction, because some things, my mind goes from micro to macro in a very quick pace, very, very fast, meaning that macro is like infinite, macro is like finite, and I go like, and like micro is like hand-to-hand combat, what I usually talk about, and the macro is about like big picture, wide angle lens. So I talk about that. So for example, one contradiction is like, I like to work hard every day, like hand-to-hand combat, doing what I can every day, but I have the patience on a macro level, on when it comes to like the big goal for that to manifest. So, so that in a sense can be seen as a contradiction, but it is not. Like, I'm looking at things from 2 timelines. One is like the day-to-day, and the other one is like the long-term timeline. So it can be seen as a contradiction, but in my mind it's not, because of what I said, you know. And I think people need to have that, keep that in mind, actually, that there's a difference. Like, you have a big goal, and you need to have the patience and the perseverance, like the indigenous movement. Like, you need to have the perseverance to do the work that you do every day at the UN, at home right now, but you need to have the patience for that to manifest and towards like your end goal. It doesn't mean, and that particular dynamic gives me a lot of peace of mind, actually, knowing that it will eventually add up to something down the line. It doesn't have to add up to something tomorrow. It doesn't have to add up to something tomorrow or the day after that. It is just keep on working, keep on doing stuff, and at the end, it will reward you with the end goal that you're achieving. And it's not just at a political level or at a global indigenous movement rights level, but also can also be on a personal level. It's, if you have an end goal of, or a, not an end goal, but like a goal of, like, I don't know, can be anything. Like, just like keep that in mind, work towards that, and then you can make it as big, hairy, audacious as you want it to be. As long as you keep on working at it every day. It doesn't mean that you have to like work at it with a lot of energy and do everything every day, because knowing that it will eventually manifest towards the end or that big goal that you have gives me peace of mind that I can take a day off, or like that I can relax a little bit, because I know that the big process is one that takes a lot of patience. So, which gives me a lot of peace of mind that I don't have to I like to do the hand-to-hand work. Don't get me wrong. I like to do a lot of work as much as humanly possible. But also if I have an off day, like I'm not feeling well, I don't have to push myself towards all right, I have to do this, because if I don't do this, I will not get to that big goal of, I don't know, 1 million in my bank account goal. It doesn't work that way, at least from my point of view. It is just relax, enjoy what you do, and also and here's something that comes to my mind as well. I also like to taste a lot of different things. So if I try tea time, for example, I did that for a while. It worked, and I figure this is a concept that I like, but there's some things that I didn't like. So boom, and the week after that, I went back to long form conversations. So it is the opposite of things. It does not contradict. It's not contradictive. It's just like tasting. What works. This works. Let's try to apply it in this particular context of long form conversations. That works a little bit. All right, let's see. You try to learn as you go. Like I said, your truth, your the way you think you do the way you do the things you do. Is that a word? It is a very flexible concept. So, yeah. So long story short, I'm not afraid to contradict myself. It is just a matter of perspective. Seeing things the way that I see is like micro, macro, or finite, infinite, hand-to-hand combat, big, hairy, audacious goal. So, yeah.
What was the hardest decision you ever had to make at the United Nations?
Yeah, one comes to mind. I was 28 at the World Conference, and so that was World Conference on Indigenous Peoples held in 2014. 28, youngest co-chair of a General Assembly session ever. That's what I've heard. And co-chairing Roundtable 1 on UN System Action, or was it 2? Yeah, sorry. Roundtable 2 on UN System Action. Or 1? Can't remember. I should remember that though. Anyway, so was co-chair of the Roundtable. and my other co-chair was the permanent representative of the Czech Republic. And so we made the arrangement that she would facilitate the first hour and a half, and I would facilitate the last hour and a half session. So World Conference, General Assembly level, so we're talking about like representative institutions, like heads of delegations, heads of government, like prime ministers, ministers, UN under secretary generals, assistant secretary generals, directors, executive directors, and like heads of Indian representative institutions of Indigenous peoples. So it was pretty high level. So I was still a young guy back then, and it was my turn after the halfway mark, and I got this list of speakers. So they gave us two lists, one of Indigenous peoples and one of member states and UN agencies. So you have to like go back, like a pendulum, go back and forth between the two lists. And also they take into account, all right, you don't want to have Russia speak after the Indigenous peoples from Crimea. You can do that, but it's best to like keep it further away from each other, so that there won't be a showdown of right of reply on the floor. So like all these things that I had to keep in mind, like the geopolitical things. So I had these two lists as I went back and forth, and as I think like 30 minutes in, I realized if I would continue providing 3 minutes to all the speakers, we would be in trouble, because like the meeting is supposed to end at 6, and if I would continue to give everyone 3 minutes, we would end at 8 p.m. or like 7:30, something along those lines. So I asked my co-chair and secretary that was sitting right next to us, like, all right, what should I do? And it was Ayla Biret, my friend that was helping me out, also asked her, like, all right, what should I do? So you ask the people around you, like, and what they think, and then you call the play. And fortunately, my co-chair was very supportive. So I told her, like, well, I'm going to limit speaking time to 1 minute. And she was like, okay, yeah, you're right. And also, like, because even if we limited speaking time to 1 minute, I would also have to, we would be going into overtime. So like 6 p.m. or like instead of like ending at 7:30, we would end at like 6:30, 6:45. So that would be after 6, and usually after 6 there's no interpretation. So I also informed my co-chair that we would have to go in just English and not have a translation available after 6. Said, well, yeah, we would just give it, like, she was very aware that and this is where I come from. This is why I made that decision, because to me, speaking time at the UN for Indigenous peoples is gold. There's, in general, at the Permanent Forum, expert mechanism, any UN body, when Indigenous peoples participate in those meetings, like, speaking time is gold, let alone at the General Assembly level. Like, it's very important that they get to speak. And even if it is 1 minute, it is gold, because it will be registered as a general GA broadcast and everything else, that you had the opportunity, and you took that opportunity to speak at the General Assembly level. So that was my mindset. So that's why I made the call. So first, I limited the speaking time to 1 minute, and that not everyone did like that, of course. I did get a lot of like you saw like the entire room like being in discontent, and again, like we're talking about ministers, prime ministers, and heads of governments, and suddenly they had to limit their speaking time to 1 minute. All of a sudden, this 28-year-old coconut, this little upstart, was going to impose limitations on what states could say and Indigenous peoples could say. So I had the gavel, and I didn't have it in my hand, but I looked at the gavel, and I was like, yeah, I don't want to use it, but at some point I have to use it. So I like pulled the gavel towards me so that I was like within arm's length. And so like, and I also like give the inform everyone that we will go into overtime beyond 6 p.m. So we will continue in English only. And because, yeah, I asked the interpreters if they could stay on beyond 6 p.m. They came back with a message, no, we cannot, which is, of course, like understandable. Fortunately, my co-chair was able to sit around for a little bit longer because like the next day was the actual GA, and she had to pick up her prime minister from the airport. So she had a little bit more time. Secretary was like, yeah, let's do this. So I'm very fortunate to have had the PM PM PR, the permanent representative of Czech Republic, and the secretary next to me that were actually very supportive of the choices that I made, or the decision that I made, even though they were very hard for me. So yeah, so I announced that, and immediately I think it was Under Secretary General or Assistant Secretary General. Anyway, she was from Argentina, and she came up to the podium with her business card and wrote behind it like I've been waiting for like an hour and a half, 2 hours to speak, and now you're making me speak in my own, not in my native language of Spanish, but in English. I'm upset. Like I'm very disappointed. So she gave it to me, and I was like, oh shit! Like I'm not on a shit list now of many high level officials of the UN and states. So I gave the business card to my co-chair, and we all were like, well, she'll get over it. You know, it is, yeah. Don't worry about it. Just call her name, and when she reads her statement, she reads a statement. If not, she doesn't. Eventually, everyone got to speak, and that is something. Even though it was a hard decision, I did it because so that Indigenous peoples everyone that were registered to speak were able to speak. You know, so even though it was the hardest decision that I had to make, so I had to gavel everyone. Like, ding, ding, ding. Sorry. Thank you so much for your intervention. And now I'll give the floor to, I couldn't even like, please conclude your statement. I had to like gavel and move on. And yeah, well, I don't know. Anyway, like I'd probably be on some unofficial shit list of the UN, and I'm fine with that. Because Indigenous peoples got to read their statement.
If you were in charge of the UN Permanent Forum, where would you take it?
Purely from a effectiveness, value-based point of view, I would, because right now, how it is set up, you have like the agenda, and people get inscribed to agenda, like for every day, there are different agenda items, and it all culminates into the last day, the Friday of the second week, into the adoption of the report, right? So and then people inscribe to